you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
On Horse Chats today, we're going to introduce Linda Drattell. We're also going to talk about her competitive trail riding career and a poem book, a book that she's written called The Lighter Side of Manure. She's a professional poet, but before we get into it, before we start and I'll introduce you to Linda, I'd just like to remind you about the mission of International Horse College. So our mission is to improve the welfare of horses around the world through the safe education of their riders, trainers and handlers. So have a look at the wide variety of equine courses at internationalhorsecollege.com, registered training organisation 31352. Linda, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Not a problem, Linda. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about horses, how you came into horses, a little bit about your competitive trail riding, but mostly about the book of poems that you've written called The Lighter Side of Horse Manure. So at Horse Chats, we like to focus on careers with horses, experts with horses, and I know that specifically, you might say, but I've never worked in the horse industry. I think that by writing a book of poems about horses, you're still working within the horse industry. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so, because I would like to guide people in a better way to relate to their horses.
Yep.
And one of the things that I found, as you all may have noticed through the Olympics and the video that popped up about a trainer that was beating her horse, that some people, you work with horses long enough, you get to know all kinds of people. Some are great and they work well with their horses and they achieve success, and others try to browbeat their horses into submission. And that can affect their mental health, possibly their physical health, and any success really is short term, addressing the horse in a negative way. So, my desire through The Lighter Side of Horse Manure was to encourage people to get to know their horses, get to know their personalities, realize they have a sense of humor, and that they reach out to us.
Linda, I often ask people at the beginning of the podcast if they have a saying that they find themselves saying to themselves again and again. Sometimes instructors or coaches will be teaching this student over and over.
Yes, and this fits in perfectly with my book.
Okay, please.
It says, there are only two emotions that belong in the saddle. One is a sense of humor, and the other is patience, by John Lyons. I just feel that so fits in with my philosophy.
Yes, I think we've had that on the show before, but I just think, well, that's just reinforcing. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Can I tell people about Linda's sense of humour? I'm going to just read out one of your poems, Linda, and this is from The Lighter Side of Horse Manure. And the poem itself is called Loose Shoe. Jonathan Harrington Winfred too went for a ride till the horse threw a shoe. Oh no, tough luck. What can we do? Cried Jonathan, Harrington and Winifred too. One rode slowly, one followed in queue. The third walked briskly, holding the shoe. Back home to the barn went the riders so blue, their horses delighted, nothing to do. Leaving their horses, the riders withdrew to find another fine sport to pursue. The horses went triumphantly, woohoo, as they munched on hay and made use of the loo. I think that's just, you're a horse person, Linda, because you understand that side. You're coming from empathy of the horse, listening to the horse. And I think that's just one of the many poems within your book. So I think that combined with your favourite saying, I think that's,
And I've been on a number of trail rides where a horse threw a shoe and we all were like, oh, man. But yeah.
Yeah. So, Linda, tell us a little bit more. How did you get into competitive trail riding? Or tell us a little bit about your steps towards, which could start with your first riding lesson. But tell us a bit along those lines, so we understand how you got into competitive trail riding.
Well, as it turned out, I went through a couple of different horses that were tired off the track. They were too much horse for me. And then I got Vegas, who was a quarter horse. And I boarded him at a farm where the horse manager was very much into endurance trail riding and competitive trail riding. So she would take us out every week, a whole group of us, and we would go sailing through the woods. And she was just wonderful. She encouraged us to train properly, provide proper diet, have patience. And it was important to her that none of our horses ever showed sweat. She said, if they're sweating, then they're working too hard and you haven't trained them well. So we did these very slow, gradual training sessions. And then she would bring all of us to a competitive trail ride. So we went around all over with her, and it was a lot of fun. I loved it because aside from getting place ribbons, it was judging you as a rider as much as it was judging the horse, how well you took care of your horse on the trail and before the trail, how well you had measured the reins and the saddle and everything and made sure everything fit properly. So with a competitive trail ride, at the beginning and the end, they measure a horse's heart and respiration, and they also check for swelling. And when you finish that trail ride within the required window of time, you have to show minimal difference in the heartbeat, respiration, and swelling. So I felt always very good that we succeeded that way.
I think it's wonderful to have, a person going into a barn, into stables, just caring for their horse, where they've got a mentor, where they've got someone that looks under them. And obviously the person running the barn was keen to mentor you, to teach you these things about horses. Tell us a little bit about them.
This was back in Maryland, because right now I'm living in California, but in Maryland, we were at a farm, and the manager was Mary Ormsby Windoff, and she was absolutely fantastic. She not only had a great rapport and was a great role model with her own horse and taught us how to be with our horses, but she never had a condescending word. If she didn't like what you were doing, she would just say, well, that's one way to handle it. How about trying this approach? And you immediately understood what you were doing was wrong, but it was with a smile, and it was generous, and she offered any information she had, she was willing to share with you.
Yeah, she sounds like a great person. And the horse that you talked about before, is that the horse? Because you've had a few, haven't you? A few other horses?
Yes, that was with Vegas. I had Vegas for 29 years. I found him when he was 5. He was already at Mary's barn with another horse owner. And before that, I had 2 other thoroughbreds. Vegas was an appendix thoroughbred. I'm sorry, appendix quarter horse. So his demeanor was completely different, but he was larger than a normal quarter horse because he was appendix, which meant he was part thoroughbred. So he had the energy and the enthusiasm and the size, but he didn't have the craziness.
Now, if you were going to, because we talked before, you're working in the horse industry because you've combined your poetry with your horses. But to work in the horse industry, and you've seen quite a few, because you've had quite a few horses, what do you think a person working in the horse industry, what do you think the character traits are that they need to have?
Well, I would say patience, willingness to work as a partner with your horse, learn to read their body language to understand what it is they're telling you, and be a clear guide to your horse so they know what to expect. Those are my feelings. A lot of times, a problem may be as simple as maybe the cinch is too tight and it's pinching skin. You have to check everything and find out what the problem is. If there's a fear, then work through that fear. And there's so many different lessons to be applied. I know one of your questions was a book to read. And Clint Anderson wrote a lot about that, about how to overcome problems, how to approach water, how to approach obstacles, and work through the fear.
Yep. Yep. Now, just to do with challenges, right? Now, throughout this podcast, we haven't talked about it before. You're deaf, is that right? Hearing impaired, deaf?
Yes, that's correct. I lost my hearing in my 30s. So that's another reason I gravitate more towards animals, because they're not judgmental at all. They don't care if you can hear or not. So, yes, that's correct.
I was going to ask you about being deaf and a competitive trail ride, but that happened after you'd done competitive trail riding. Is that correct?
Right. I was starting to lose my hearing at that time. I did wear a hearing aid, but I had most of my hearing, so it wasn't really a problem. It was more later on in life.
What about challenges now? You know, like you've got your own horses still, or your own horse. Are there any challenges around feeding and caring and looking after your horse?
No, I guess passed away 2 years ago, but I was completely deaf at that point anyway. But I just took care of him. I hung out with him. I hung out with him on the farm. It's funny, he's aging, I'm aging, and riding actually was a way for us to do something together. And the other horses absolutely loved it. I mean, here's this human being that's standing in the field every day. And so they come over and lick my neck while I'm trying to clean his stall or whatever. And it was just a lot of fun. But it was my poetry, I think, that really helped me to create a bond or maintain a bond that I had when I was younger with him.
Mhm,
And now we
mhm.
were on a different stage of life.
Now, if people would like to know a little bit more about your poetry, how's the best way to contact you? You know, if they'd like to find out a bit more, if they'd like to buy one of your books.
I have a website. It's www.lindadrattell.com. And that lists everything that I'm doing, all my poetry. And it's not just my two poetry books, but I have a children's book that was published 2 years ago. And I've had a number of individual poems that have been published. I just found out I got second place for a new
Oh,
poem
well done.
with Writer's Digest.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
So I'm very proud of that. But yeah, so through that website, or I also have a YouTube channel that you just go to youtube.com at Linda Drattell and you can find me there. And my X and LinkedIn handle is at Linda Drattell.
Okay, and those details will be on horsechats.com. Just search for Linda or search for Drattell or either of those. You'd be able to find Linda on Horse Chats. And at the bottom of this chat, because we'll have a page for this chat, at the bottom of this chat, underneath, there'll be all Linda's contact details. Okay, so Linda, are there any questions that you would have liked me to ask you that I haven't asked yet?
You asked me about a horse person who inspired me, but the fact that Vegas inspired me. He inspired me incredibly, both not just with his humor, but I also wrote in my other poetry book, Remember This Day. Oh, that's what I want to mention, that Finishing Line Press is where you can order my books at finishinglinepress.com. But what I found was that
Yep.
I wrote a lot about Vegas in my previous book about life lessons, what it was like to age with dignity. And I have one poem from there that my father in law absolutely loves because Vegas doesn't realize he's old. He's still chasing the mares. He's still trying to hop the fence. He's still trying to run with the young ones. And he just gives me a kiss as if he's saying, just give me a minute. I've still got it in me. And my father in law absolutely loved that one.
I think that's, yeah, I've read quite a few of your poems. I didn't quite come across that one, but I think we can dig that up and put that on the page with the link to where you can get the book as well. Linda, thank you. Thank you for your time and thank you for coming on today. Lovely to hear from you.
Yes, absolutely. It was fantastic. I was very glad. I'm so happy to be able to talk about everything. It makes my horse still alive for me. So he was like a second husband.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.